There's just 1 week to go. I'm Harry Cole, and this is Never Mind the Ballots Election Countdown. Remember to subscribe to us at youtube.com/sunelection for all of the latest news. So that's it. No more debates, no more head-to-heads. After 5 rounds of Starmer versus Sunak, we'll have all the post-match analysis of last night's feisty clash. But first, I'll be speaking to Labour's Bridget Phillipson. Labour's Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson, welcome back to Never Mind the Ballots. You appeared very briefly on our election show on Monday night, so thank you for that. What did you make of last night's debate?
Hello, good to be back with you. I felt last night set out the difference that a Labour government could make under Keir Starmer with a positive plan for the change our country needs. But people have to go out and vote for it if they want that change, or if they want another 5 years of the Conservatives. After all of the chaos and division that we've seen, that's the alternative that they face. And I felt Rishi Sunak really had nothing positive to say about the direction of our country, and there were lots of pretty desperate lies in terms of what he claimed about Labour.
He had your man on the ropes, though, a little bit towards the conversations around migration. That wasn't, I think, Keir Starmer's finest TV moment. He was a bit floundering there, wasn't he, on boats?
No, Labour's plans involve delivering a border security command to make sure that we're cracking down on those criminal smuggler gangs, but at source. Over 1,000 new cross-border officers, making sure that they've got the powers that they need, treating this as a national security issue to stop people making those journeys across the Channel. And we've got to process the huge backlog of cases that we see at the moment. The Conservatives have given up on trying to make sure we've got a functioning asylum and immigration system, and it has ended up in a terrible, terrible mess. But if we form the next government, we're determined to turn that around and make sure that we secure our borders.
There are 50,000 people currently in legal limbo, unable legally to apply for asylum. Labour have said that they will process those people. Given, realistically, processing rates don't really, approval rates don't really drop below around 65%. Isn't that just a green light for people to come? If you're going to say you're going to process everyone, 65% of those people will be able to stay. They're pretty good odds if you're in a migrant camp in Calais thinking about coming, aren't they?
No, what any responsible government should do is make sure that you're processing cases, because if you don't do that, you end up in the position that we've got right now under the Conservatives, where we're spending millions of pounds every day putting people up in hotels. That is completely unacceptable. So we need to process those cases. Those who don't have a right to be in our country need to be returned. That is an important point of principle.
How long will that take? You're saying that you're going to abolish use of hotels. Where are you going to put these people while you process them?
We will make sure we've got more caseworkers processing those cases so we can move rapidly to do that. I think it's totally wrong that people are often sat around for extended periods of time with their cases not being dealt with. The only way you can determine whether someone has the right or not to be in this country is to process their case. That hasn't happened under the Conservatives.
How long do you think it's going to take?
Well, we'll get to work on day one if we win the trust of the British people and start that process. Absolutely. It's scandalous that this has been allowed to drift for so many years. I would just point out that when Labour last left power in 2010, we didn't have these kinds of backlogs. We made sure that cases were processed and dealt with, and under the Conservatives that we've
seen. The world is a very different place in 14 years. Look
it's a very different place in lots of ways, and I think it's a different place where it comes to the NHS as well, where waiting lists are at an absolute record high and patient satisfaction is through the floor. Just to give another example of the Conservatives' stellar record in which they're standing for re-election after 14 years.
We'll move on in a second. I just want to play you something that Sir Keir Starmer said on Monday night in our own debate about the Bangladeshi community. Let's go play this clip.
They will go back to the countries where people come from. That's what used to happen.
Where I mean, it's so hard to do.
Well, at the moment, people coming from countries like Bangladesh are not being removed because they're not being processed.
Why did he choose Bangladesh?
It's one example of a number that can be used to demonstrate where we do...
Not in the top five, even in the top 5, though, is it? You've got Afghanistan, Iran, Turkey, Eritrea, Iraq. Why Bangladesh?
It's an example of one of a number of countries where we have bilateral agreements in place so that we can return people where it's determined that they don't have a right to be here in the UK. I think we have seen in recent times as well similar arrangements with Albania that's meant that we've been able to speed up the processing of cases and returning people where they don't have a right to be here. That's the principle that is driving it, making sure we've got a fair system that works for the British people.
That comment's gone down very badly with in the Bangladeshi community, who feel like they're being picked on. Lots of Labour supporting members of the Bangladeshi community are furious. Bit of a backfire there, isn't it?
As I say, it's one example of a number of countries where we've got those arrangements in place. What Keir is really proud of is the strong record he has in engagement and working with the Bangladeshi community here in the UK. That is absolutely our commitment. And I would just slightly caution that I think the way in which some of this has been clipped and shared on social media, I think has been done so in a way as to give a different impression.
Isn't that the problem, though, that the Labour Party is always going to have? Because Keir Starmer and the Shadow Cabinet are taking a much harder line on immigration and boats than large percentages of Labour supporters and Labour members are ever going to be happy with. And there's always going to be that tension in a Labour government that the public want a harder line on immigration, but the party want to go in a different way.
I think what the public want and what I want to see and what a Labour government will deliver if we have the opportunity is a fair and functioning asylum system and a fair and functioning immigration system. I mean, there is an important, I think, national story around the contribution that migrants have made to our country. I wouldn't be speaking to you today if my family hadn't come over from Ireland. They worked in the NHS, served in the armed forces, and it's about having a fair system where people are aware of their rights and their responsibilities. Yeah. People don't have a right to be in our country. We make sure that they are returned elsewhere.
Bridget, let's move on. I know we haven't got you for very long. Let's talk about your own brief. Sorry to drag you into Home Affairs when you're clearly got lots on your own plate. Your sort of flagship policy to pay for lots of the new teachers with a tax increase on tax or VAT on private school fees. Can we just get something clear? That's not coming in this September. It will come in next September. Is that correct? Should you win?
Will come in. Yeah, it will come in through the usual processes that are determined through a budget, through the parliamentary timetable, and as set out in the budget that a Labour Chancellor will deliver if we have that opportunity to do so. If people
presumably that budget won't be before the kids go back to school in early September.
Well, I don't think Rachel Reeves would be very happy with me if I were to offer.
You can reveal to Never Mind the Balance the date of a Labour budget. We don't mind. We won't tell Rachel.
She certainly wouldn't want to be given the impression that we're measuring up the curtains and that we think that a Labour government is a done deal, because I can tell you there's lots of people out there that still haven't made up their minds, and we're fighting hard every day to persuade them to go out there and vote Labour on the 4th of July.
But it would be pretty astonishing to increase fees on private schools in literally about 12 weeks' time without fair warning. Presumably you won't be doing it in September 2024, will you?
Look, I'm not going to prejudge Rachel Reeves' first budget if she is the Chancellor in the government. We haven't won the election yet. But what I would say is that this has been our policy for a very long time now, since it was first announced in 2021. So private schools have had ample notice as to the change that a Labour government would bring. And the reason we want to introduce this policy, just to be absolutely clear, is because we believe that we need to get more teachers into our classrooms, more teachers in subjects like maths and science, where we've got big shortages at the moment, more mental health support within our schools. We know that lots of young people and families are struggling at the moment, and we'll do that by ending the tax breaks that private schools enjoy. So it's about the impact and the better outcomes and life chances for children that we can deliver. And it's a straight up political choice. The vast majority of children in our country go to state schools. Their parents don't have the money to send them to very expensive private schools, and they want a brilliant state education for their children. And that's what I'm determined I will deliver if I'm Education Secretary.
There are concerns, and we heard them from our readers on Monday night, that actually it's not necessarily park the idea of what the politics and policy of increasing tax on the wealthy. Parents who don't send their children to private schools are concerned that resources are already very, very stretched in the state sector, and an influx potentially in September 2024 or September 2025 of more kids into those classes is going to have a direct effect on their children. So is it not slightly cutting off one's nose to spite their face?
No, and to deal with that head on, an independent report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies was clear that Labour's policy will raise £1.3 to £1.5 billion net. That's taking account of any potential change, and they don't actually accept that argument. We'll invest that money directly into state schools because we know they're under big pressure.
Will it be immediate, though? Isn't the problem that the fees go up, the kids leave the private schools, they go immediately into the state sector because they've got to go somewhere, but your policy hasn't had time to sort of permeate, and the money hasn't been raised, and the teachers haven't been recruited. So in the short term, do you rule out, would you delay the policy if you're concerned about pressure on the state sector?
So I don't accept the argument, not least because we actually see falling numbers of young people arriving in our schools. We've got a falling birth rate. Actually, the numbers of young people in schools is falling. So I don't accept that argument, but there is actually quite a lot of space opening up. And that's why I've talked about, for example, in primary schools, using some of that space to create more nurseries. At the moment in primary schools, we've got over 600,000 spare places within primary schools because of the big fall in the birth rate we've seen. So I just don't accept that. And also, I just think this is about making sure that all of our children get a great start in life. And that has to involve brilliant teachers and more teachers in areas like maths and science, where at the moment in our state schools, chances are there's a good chance that children are being taught by someone who isn't a specialist in, say, maths. And that has big consequences in terms of children's learning. And we need to turn that around.
Just one final question on this. Some private schools run nurseries. Are you ruling out putting VAT on any nursery costs?
So that's a separate arrangement altogether. And what I would say to private schools, I mean, just across the board, our message around the changes they can make on VAT, they've whacked up their fees way beyond inflation.
You're not ruling out putting VAT on nursery fees in private sector.
This is about the phase of compulsory education. Just to be absolutely clear, that's not our plan.
Okay.
But private schools have been putting up fees year after year, way beyond inflation, and actually we've seen an increase in the numbers of young people at private schools. So I just don't accept that. And I think private schools, like all businesses, can make decisions about how they spend their money. Our state schools have had to make some pretty tough choices in recent years. And I just think private schools maybe should take some advice from state schools on how to manage their budgets and cut their cloth.
Bridget Phillipson, thank you very much for joining us. Come and see us again soon, perhaps when you're Education Secretary before too long. Best of luck. See you soon.
Thank you.
Noah, good morning.
Morning.
Son's Noah Hoffman, looking
Hello.
radiant as ever. How are you the only person on this campaign that doesn't look exhausted?
I wear a lot of concealer.
So do I these
lot.
days. 7 days to go.
Yes, finally.
I mean-
I think we all love democracy. We're all politics nerds. We live and breathe politics.
But does it not
Was that
feel that
enough?
we could have done this election? Maybe.
Right.
When we started doing the Daily Show, that sign behind me said 37 days. So do you not think we could have done this in a nice, short, sharp, snappy 4-week election?
I think so, and I think actually everyone would benefit from that. The public wouldn't have to sit through 500 debates, but also they wouldn't get fatigued with the arguments constantly being put out by the two politicians. There'd perhaps be even less apathy. So I think it could have been beneficial.
Let's talk about last night's debate. Rishi Sunak, I mean, he was the new guy, right? Came out swinging, had some decent sound bites, quoted Jaws. We were going to need a bigger boat. Let's see his zinger, shall we? His first zinger.
To win, the people smugglers are going to need a bigger boat. Don't surrender our borders to the Labour Party.
Record numbers coming across the channel. And he says it's a deterrent. There are a few hundred that would go on a flight to Rwanda at huge expense to the taxpayer. There are tens of thousands. 50,000 people have come since Rishi Sunak has been Prime Minister.
That's quite lively, quite sparky. Well, I mean, if you can see why Starmer only wanted to do 2 of these, right? Because he's not that good in the sort of clashing context, is he?
Yeah, the format where Rishi Sunak thrives most is the head-to-head debate because he's much more comfortable going in with catchphrases, with big attack lines, and really, he's all right to spice it up and perhaps be a bit controversial, whereas Keir Starmer's a lot more flowery, a lot more sort of intellectual about it. It doesn't lend itself to the format.
Lawyer. He's the sort of lawyer that,
Right.
we talked about this before, he sort of expects almost to be like, right, everyone's going to give him their turn, and actually he was better than the first debate, God knows when that was, 4 weeks ago, three weeks ago, where he actually was sort of, he was much more sort of reserved and calm. He did come back with some. He went studs in at the top on Partygate.
Yeah.
He went personally for the PM's character. I thought was that's what we're here for. We're here for a dust up, right? Too little, too late though from Sunak, do you think?
I think too little, too late was really reflected in the poll, the snap poll that came out at the end of the debate that showed that audiences were split sort of 50-50 as to who won it. Whereas while we were watching it and while a lot of sort of...
There's the YouGov poll, you can see there,
yes,
50-50.
political aficionados watched it. It was clear in a lot of our minds that Rishi Sunak was performing better.
But given that Rishi Sunak is 20 points behind nationally, 50-50 is a pretty good win there, right? Given that for his, if you look at every other rating, Keir Starmer's miles behind. So you even get level pegging.
Yeah,
is a decent win, but that's not all the polls though. There was a More in Common poll last night which had Starmer slightly further ahead. More in Common's numbers. Luke, who's been on the show many times, in fact, coming back tomorrow. That one had 56% Starmer, 44% Sunak. Again, Sunak, sort of far ahead of his personal ratings and his poll ratings, which frankly have been in the toilet since day one of this campaign and haven't managed to get out of there, really. So, right, so let's have a look a bit more of it. Let's have another clip of the debate.
If someone is offered a job and they can do that job and they turn it down, that's wrong.
No, there's nothing wrong with that, and I just want to address Beverly's point.
You opposed it when I announced it. You literally opposed it.
If you listen to people in the audience across the country more often, you might not be quite so out of touch.
I thought that was Starmer's best moment. Literally, nailed his line, and Sunak squirming there. The out of touch thing, is it playing out?
Definitely, time and time again. I mean, obviously, vox pops aren't scientific, but when you turn on the news, when you are out on the street, when you're walking with politicians and speaking to the public, the number one negative factor around Rishi Sunak is the idea that he's out of touch. So to play into that from Starmer was a very smart move. And
then there was a moment which I very enjoyed, when even the BBC couldn't put up with some of Starmer's lines. Let's have a look at that.
He's been asked multiple times, will he change the council tax bans? He won't rule it out. I'll ask him again, but I'm going to tell you, do not surrender your family finances to Labour's tax rises. Don't surrender our borders to the Labour Party. So it's one thing to stand here and say all these things. You should at least be upfront with people. You don't think my approach is the right one. You are going to have higher welfare under you, and that's why you can't deliver tax cuts the way that I can. And people should not surrender to this.
No surrender.
Yes.
He hit his buzzwords, didn't he? He had it 15 times, I'm told, last night.
And it's an effective word, it conjures up images of military and war and actually having some fight in you. And I don't understand why this wasn't used earlier on in the campaign, because let's be honest, the last 14 years aren't the best sort of please vote for me.
Yeah.
But they're not the most persuasive line. The strongest ammunition that Rishi Sunak has is Keir Starmer's flip-flopper. You can't trust him. He served under Jeremy Corbyn.
Don't give a big, massive majority.
I know, his whole campaign should have focused more on that, because being on the offensive, saying, look at what we've done, look at our record, that's obviously not working.
We had the worm the other day that showed exactly that point. No, but it is an interesting point. 7 days ago, this is actually when most normal people, not like us, actually start to zoom in on this election. Strong performance from Sunak. If he keeps hammering that surrender line, people in the privacy of the ballot box, are they really going to give Starmer the supermajority? This is presumably what we're going to hear all the way to polling day now, just sow in those seeds of doubt.
Yeah, so I think what they're going to do, as you said, is ram home that message with 7 days and then just hope and pray that the so-called shy Tories decide, look, we're the only ones...
Is it cringe to say you vote in Sunak?
Is it yeah, I think publicly it's a bit embarrassing among some circles.
Now, I had a favourite moment of last night. Let's see Robert, who I think we should hire as a Sun leader writer.
Mr. Sunak, I think you made a fair job of being Chancellor, but you're a pretty mediocre Prime Minister. Sir Keir, I think that your strings are being pulled by very senior members of the Labour Party. Are you two really the best we've got to be the next Prime Minister of our great country?
Hey, preach, right? I mean, I loved Robert. I mean, he was right there saying exactly what everyone thinks. Ever since we, on the first day of this election, splashed the front page of The Sun saying, you know what, for God's sake, why did you have to do this now? That whole encapsulates the whole mood of the election of, really? Is this it? Right?
Yeah, exactly. He did personify what so many people are thinking. I mean, at least we're not America. It could be worse. However, he's absolutely right. And it's interesting as well, because you see quite a lot of people saying, oh, if only it was this person in charge, I think, maybe then I could vote a certain way. There seems to be some talent underneath both leaders, particularly in Labour, actually.
Well, Starmer's saying he wants 10 years. He wants 10 years in power to finish the job.
Well, you know, he may well get it.
The last person I heard that say they wanted 10 years in power to finish the job was Boris Johnson, and he resigned 5 days later.
That went well.
Thank you, Noah. Thank you, Bridget Phillipson. Talking of debates, we'll be back tomorrow talking about yet another debate because it's Trump versus Biden for the first time tonight. And I don't think we'll be able to avoid having a little bit of a chat about that. This was Never Mind the Ballots Election Countdown. Remember to subscribe, youtube.com/@sunelection. Watch every day. See you then.